Wouldn't you know it, the field next to the other road is an art piece, an artwork by the artist Jean-Michel Basquiat. And I think it was, when was it created? In 1981, and it's under the movement of neo-expressionism. I couldn't tell you with my own eyes that I have an idea what he was trying to capture, what he was feeling at the time that he was creating this art piece. And I would actually love for the people who are in the art world or who are artists themselves to kind of leave a comment down below to share their insight on what they think he was thinking or wanted to express through this painting, because I have no clue what that is. And I only bring this up because the last the last video, I think I've forgotten what yes, the episode was called Time Transfixed. And in my head I was like, am I reaching, am I tripping, like when I made the correlation of the episode being inspired by a piece of artwork. So now the second time around, I'm like, listen girl, now I'm just waiting for a third time to confirm that. I mean, whoever was in charge of writing at least some of these episodes was inspired by pieces of art. So I continue. This is episode 3, and I was stressing that, as I have in my previous videos, that I'm just comparing and contrasting what's in the book that kind of didn't make it on or also featured in the episode. So let's continue. So Lady Whistledown reports that Rosamond has her cap set for Mr. Cavendar and thinks they are well matched. Okay. Benedict offered work at his mother's house immediately after the whole Mr. Cavendar situation, or as it was happening, and not like in episode 4. So Benedict also feels that Sophie seems familiar, but he does not know from where. And Sophie says it's because all housemaids look the same. And as she's saying this, part of her doesn't want him to recognize her, and another part of her does, and she's disappointed that he doesn't really know who she is. But then later on, I think in the previous episode I explained why a lot of her, like, physically changed. She doesn't have the same length of hair as usual, and I don't think it was common for women to switch up their hairstyles that much. And also she's lost so much weight from how she looked in the masquerade. And I think, yeah. Yes, and of course, before she was dressed as a lady, and now she's like, looks like a housemaid. But I will also add that you couldn't really tell like her facial features because she was wearing a demi mask. And when I was reading the book, it describes as the demi mask covering like a big portion of her face. So it's not like she was just wearing sunglasses or those skinny, superhero masks. No, this mask took up a huge portion of her face. So let's give Benedict some grace, because I was just like, as I was watching the show, I was like, Benedict, how can you not know? Okay, we move on. So Sophie dreams of marriage and kind of reconciles that the reality of her situation, the best outcome would probably being his mistress. And she swore to herself that being a mistress is something that she would never ever do. Moving on. Between the ball and where we are during the Mr. Cavendar, it's 2 years, right? And so between that time, Benedict had attended twice as many functions as usual in the hopes that he'd catch a glimpse of her. And he watched for her at every ball, party, and musical. So this is directly from the book. So this was his version of searching for her, right? It wasn't as, intense, and I should say as intentional as it was seen in the episode. And he did this for a year. So he also used to automatically compare every woman he'd met to her. So that was his standard. He waited on being married because he was worried that he'd get married and then he'd meet her again. And this scenario would break his heart. I was like, look at the depth of Benny. Also, I saw like on the online streets that they're calling the couple Benofi, and I was like, I don't know. It doesn't really feel like they should be called Benofi, but let me know, what cute name would you give them as a couple? Remember Brangelina? That was cute. Brangelina was cute. The name, not the transaction of how they became to be Brangelina. They did Jen dirty. But we move on. Sophie knows how to drive teams. So the teams are like the horses, right? And when he, and oh yeah, let me say also this, like, well-born ladies knew how to like drive horses, at least in her household, in the Penwood household, because Rosamond and Posey in the book, they were taught how to drive teams. And also her accent seems distinguished. And these are the things that set her apart, that you're not exactly like housemaid material. There's something more to you. Because when they were in the carriage ride, Benedict was getting rained on and he was coughing. Both of them were getting rained on, and Benedict was coughing like mercilessly. And like he couldn't really, he was having trouble having control of the horses and everything. And Sophie was just like, hey, let me take over, I can drive. And Benedict was like, how do you know how to drive? So that's why I bring this up. So as mentioned, Benedict was sick during the horse ride, right? And they were exposed to the elements. So previously he'd said he'd had a head cold, and I think this whole being drenched in rain made him get sicker, and it was worsened by the rain. So My Cottage, when they arrive at My Cottage, the name of the cottage, of course, is My Cottage, and we learned that it was coined by the previous owner and is in a rose mead in the countryside. So also we see that Sophie is in the book so grateful, and she keeps on thanking him on numerous occasions for his rescue early at the Cavendar estate. And when they arrive at My Cottage, she has like an emotional breakdown, and she just cries and cries and cries, right? And Benedict notices that she was crying, and he holds her, and he's holding her because he thinks that, oh yeah, this is just release from the traumatic event that she's just endured. But then she says that she was crying because she's thinking about everything that happened in her life after her father died, which was 9 years. She's crying because of the attack. She's crying because of the memory of him holding her at the masquerade and being in his arms again. And also because he was nice, even though he was ill, like he put his illness aside to comfort her. And also he was nice because he was comforting her because she was a housemaid. And in the book, it's very clear that people in the town didn't really pay attention to, and that's the best case scenario. And the worst case scenario is like they didn't even treat them like as human beings. They were like lower class citizens. Like they only cared for them as long as they were serving them, really. And also because she had bottled up all her emotions, and she hadn't cried. She couldn't remember the last time she cried. And also because she felt so alone. And I was like, oh, Sophie, Sophie. Yeah. So also they had like a cute little moment where after they finished hugging and everything, they kind of had a little race to the front of the locked door. And it was Benedict who found a spare key to open My Cottage. It wasn't Sophie who was like found a way to hop in the house or through a window and open the door. No, in the book it was Benedict. And then another lady whistled down report. Lady Penwood and Lady Featherington almost came to blows at the Smythe Smith musicale because Lady Penwood stole Lady Featherington's lady's maid, offering her higher wages and free cast-off clothing. And the maid fled back to Lady Featherington's house because Lady Penwood added more duties that were ascribed to the scullery maid, upstairs maid, and cook. So we see in the book that it was actually Lady Penwood who had started that trend of like paying people in like the old season's clothes. And also, I forgot to mention in the previous episodes that I'd done that in the books, Lady Whistledown's identity is unknown. Okay, Benedict did offer Sophie a guest room, so that is something that happened in the book as well as in the show. And while she was getting his ready, she discovered a small bowl of rocks which contained a lifelong collection of rocks, including a pinkish one with a ragged gray vein in the middle that he had picked up on a hike the day his father died. And there will be more on the day his father died later on in this video. Next, Benedict went to bed already sick, and he woke up feverish and was nursed by Sophie. Oh no, what happened? Hold on one second. Just having technical difficulties. Okay, we're back. And we established that he didn't have like a cut from a broken bottle or whatever. It's just because he had like a cold, a really bad cold. And Sophie, when he had this moment of kiss me, like in his state of delirium, Sophie did kiss him. And she confessed that she loved him and always had. And I was like, what? What? And the whole time he was talking to the mystery, he was meaning the mystery woman in silver. That part was like understood as well in the show. So also, like, while she was just chilling in his room and watching over him as he was sick, just making sure that nothing happened to him, she discovered that she discovered his sketchbook, which was filled with pencil drawings of landscapes, and it's described as him capturing the whole and true moment in his paintings or in his sketches. And she also saw portraits of his family. And the last sketch in the book was of the lady in silver fleeing from the ball, holding her skirts above her ankles. And he got the details of the dress perfectly. He got the details of the elbow length glove perfectly, and even how she had styled her hair. So she's surprised, of course, of seeing her picture in his book, but she's also surprised that Lady Whistledown doesn't know or write about his artistic talent. Next, Sophie slept in Benedict's clothes. There were no clothes from his sister mentioned in the cottage in the book. Mr. and Mrs. Crabtree had left to visit their daughter who had a new baby when they got caught in the storm. This is true also in the show. They know that Sophie is a servant very early on, as soon as they meet her, in fact. Though they treat her well, Mrs. Crabtree tells Benedict she would be a good fit and addition to the staff in My Cottage as they are getting older and could use the help. None of that was kind of captured in the show. So, as mentioned previously, Sophie does not wear the Bridgerton sisters' clothes, and nothing suggests such dresses are in the cottage. Instead, Mrs. Crabtree offers Sophie her clothes, while the only one Sophie owns dries off. And Mrs. Crabtree's dresses were not cute at all. They were not flattering. In fact, Benedict hates how she looks in that dress. Um, Sophie thinks to secure her own employment in the village, and Benedict shuts the whole story down as he wants her to work for Violet. And true to the show, she was very, very hungry, and like Benedict was teasing her about how hungry she was, and like, listen, he was telling her, listen, you can take the whole there was like a huge like serving spoon, and he was teasing her and telling her, hey, you can use this spoon to like eat if you want, you can have it all to yourself. And like she was so mad, and he was like, thank you for not throwing it. And she was just like, I don't know, they have this banter about them that is of Benedict being playful and he and Sophie being irritated by his playfulness in a cute way. And like before she leaves the room, she like throws the spoon at him, and I was like, okay, spicy. Another lady whistled down report. Benedict has been in the countryside for a week, so we didn't know how long. Not that they should mention it, but I just, some little things I pick up on just interest me, and yeah, that's why I share it. There was also, fun fact, there was an art to preparing tea, and this art was taught to highborn ladies. So when they are in the countryside and like she's preparing his tea, she notices that Sophie knows the manner of like preparing tea. It's not just like, oh, I'm just going to pour it into your cup. No, there was like a style, there was some etiquette, and like he kind of like banks it in his mind. And she tells him that, no, in his mind he says, he thinks to himself like, okay, it must be because she really used to observe how highborn ladies do it, and she mastered that art. That's how he justifies it to himself. Okay. And we also know that they spend quite some time together. She comes in, reads to him, they discuss like novels that she's reading, and this time around she wanted to pick some poetry, and she was planning, sorry, to read as they were also having tea. And then there's something that she did, a gesture that she had on his face, a gesture she had on her face that really started like getting Benedict hot and bothered. And he was just in his mind was telling him there's no way he can stay there with Sophie and spend time without him doing something to her or something going down in that room. So he was just like, listen, I forgot something, and I think I need to just do something. I need a private moment. And she was like, oh, you need to use the chamber pot, aka the loo. And he was like, yes, right. So she leaves the room and everything, and he did that so that he could get away from Sophie. And yes, it was as awkward as I am describing it. So yeah, he gathers his things, and then he gets out of the window. He sneaks out of his room through the window, and he's just like, listen, I just need to get some fresh air. I need like a cold bath. So he's something cold. So that's when he decides to go and swim on the pond or the lake. I will refer to it as the lake from now on, but truly in the book they describe it as a pond. And yes, I think I've said everything that about that scene. So also Benedict had told her about the pond and not Mr. Crabtree. In another Lady Whistledown report, Lady Penwood called Lady Featherington a conniving, ill-bred thief in front of no less than 3 society matrons, including Dowager Viscountess Bridgerton. And then Lady Featherington in turn called Lady Penwood's home no better than a workhouse, citing the ill treatment of her lady's maid. So you can see in the book, it's established that Lady Penwood is just not a likable person in society and even within her own home. So the book paints her out as more cruel than she actually is portrayed in the show. For whatever reason, I don't know, but it still works for me. And I will say that now that I think about it, random side note, that I think the couple name should be Bayfie, as in Bay, Bae, Phie, just because Benedict is Bay. Like, according to the book, he's a gentleman, he's debonair, he's handsome. So that's why the Bay part, and of course, Sophie too. And I will say also, Sophie is good looking in the show. I don't know about the books because they don't really describe her looks, and they do to a degree, but they don't write her out as beautiful. But I know she is. So this time, that this season, the time of season it is taking place in is May. So it's not yet quite spring, but it's approaching spring. And I say that to explain how cold that pond was. It was freezing because like all the ice hadn't like completely melted, and the temperature hadn't risen. So he was swimming in super cold water, and that's how down bad Benedict was. Yeah. Meanwhile, in the cottage, Sophie and Mrs. Crabtree realize that Benedict isn't in his room. And, they're just having a discussion between themselves of like, where could he be? And he needs to be in bed because he's not really recovering that well, the whole spiel. Then Sophie is just like, wherever he is, I'm sure he'll come around and you will see that he's okay. In the meantime, because I never get this opportunity to just chill and be free, have some leisure time to myself, I think I'll just go for a walk. And Mrs. Crabtree is like, yeah, that's a good idea. And while you're at it, go pick me some flowers. So she's walking around, as we also see in the show, and then she just ends up stumbling like across like a thicket or something, and then she ends up seeing the lake. And when she sees the pond/lake, that's when she sees Benedict swimming completely in his birthday suit. And she's like, yeah, I should go away. But then she's like, ain't nobody doing that. Because she thought she would look at him in a place like where she could hide, where he couldn't see her looking at him. But she was like, I am going to look at him, watch him swimming. And of course, she had all sorts of wicked thoughts. She was hopeful to see more than just above the waist stuff. So as he is swimming, at that very moment, he just has this sixth sense that he's being watched. But then it didn't creep him out. It made him feel good, like a nice feeling. It made him feel excited. And he had a breathless rush of emotion, as Julia Quinn writes. He felt like his life was about to change, like it did at the night of the masquerade ball. And this is straight off the book, right? So she also talks about other sixth sense of moments that he's had. And the first one, remember how I was telling you about later on, we'll talk about the day that his father died. So on that day, their father died in Kent, which is at their countryside estate. And Benedict was racing Anthony like on horseback, and he lost the race because of that weird, strange feeling that he felt, right? And he came home and learned then that Edmund had died because he had been stung by a bee. Okay, then the other third, sixth sense moment was at the masquerade ball, the night of the masquerade ball. So all these sixth sense moments have been things that have been life changing, and two of them involve Sophie, but he doesn't know it's Sophie for both those moments. So then he's just like, let me just get out of this water and find out whatever is happening. And then yeah, he calls out, like, for someone, like, whoever is out there, come out. Then it dawns on him that, oh my gosh, it's Sophie who's watching. He had no rhyme or reason to explain why it was her. He just knew why that it was her. Then there's a lot of back and forth, and she's just like, he's like, if you try to run away and go back to the house, to the cottage, I'll let you know that I will chase you down and I will tackle you. So she wasn't just like, lured, like, oh, out of good conscience, come out. No, he teased her and threatened her, like, if she didn't do it his way, what was happening. And in the book, they say Benedict has this way of getting whatever he wants. She proceeds to get out after a lot of teasing, and he calls her out for kind of being curious about him and watching him. And after a lot of going back and forth where she's scrambling and trying to show that she's a decent person, he called her out and is like, okay, yeah, sure thing. And then she is just mortified, and she's just like, you've embarrassed me enough. I don't know what you could possibly do to punish me more, Benedict. And when she mentioned his name, that's when things went off. Like, for him, he's just like, listen, I don't care about all this self-control business. I am actually going to go for it. So he touches her face. A lot of things. I am not honestly going to go into it because it's cringe for me, not only just to watch it with someone, like some of these romantic intimate scenes, but even attempting to talk about it is weird. But I will just talk about like how they ended up kissing. So he's touching her face, he's looking at her, and he's like, she's so beautiful, she's very pretty. And he says this to her, you're so pretty, like something out of a fairy tale. And then he's just like, listen, I can't take it anymore, I have to kiss you. And it was like, I can't not kiss you, I have to kiss you because it's very much like breathing. I don't have any option but to do it. And I found that so romantic. Anyways, so they ended up kissing, and it was a good kiss, that's what I'll say. And that little kiss led to more kissing. For more details, refer to the book. I'm not gonna talk about it here. I just can't do it, y'all. So then, as they're in the throes of passion, he talks about like burning her dress because like I mentioned, he hated the way Mrs. Crabtree's dress looked on her, and which leads to talk of him buying her silks and satins. And that moment is ruined by lust, I would say. She felt like he was just motivated by lust and not love. So she's the one who says she cannot be his mistress, because that was like kind of what it was alluding to, like the act of passion. If they engaged in the act of love, it would lead to him wanting to just keep her as his mistress. And we know that she has vowed that is something she doesn't want to be anybody's mistress. And he's just like, so what's the problem? Now they get into a fight, and he's like, you can have everything, you don't deserve a life of servitude. Like, this is just not fitting for you. You can have everything you want here. Then she's like, so you're the one who's offering me to be your mistress, And at this point, this is where I think the episode An Offer from a Gentleman, because the offer was for her to be his mistress. So it kind of overlaps into this scene at my cottage at the pond slash lake. So there's a bit of an overlap, and I'm even wondering how I'm going to go into explaining the next episode, because this is where the offer technically starts. Anywho's, so they fight. Benedict is fighting with her about a life of servitude over breaking her vows and morals, and so she resolves to leave the cottage and just go to London and find her own way and get employed somehow by someone else. So he gets angry because she has no money and prospects for work, and she's vulnerable in the cruel world that she lives in, that is London. And he wants to protect her, but he ends up insulting her by saying she's not being intelligent, by refusing not only his offer to be his mistress, but also his offer to work at his mom's house. So then she snaps when he says this and punches him out, and she's walking away. She wants to go back to the cottage to get her things, and she doesn't have many things. She just has like one change of clothes. Then he grabs her by the ankles to stop her from leaving, and she trips and then tries to leave again, but then Benedict won't let her go. They end up walking back to the house. And as they're walking, they're still fighting. And then as she's packing and everything, she's like, listen, I cannot be your mistress. Like, I'm just not going to do it, because like, what if we have kids and all that stuff? So when she says I can't, that's when it dawns on him that, oh, there's something about you saying you can't be a mistress. It's because you're illegitimate. So he called her out on it, and she kind of affirms by being quiet and not like refusing that she's illegitimate. And he tries to bargain, but then she talks about him, what happens when he eventually marries the right person, what happens when they have children. And she doesn't want her children to suffer the trauma that she went through as a child, as being like an illegitimate child of a man of good standing, right? So then in the book it says the pain of her childhood was still too fresh, and the stigma of her illegitimacy felt like a brand to her soul. So she's not just being difficult for nothing. This is something that it's just hurt her to the core. So it's something that she's not willing to compromise over. So then he asks her about her father, and she lies. She says she doesn't know who he was. And then her mother, and she says that her mom passed away. And previously, like, she had been saying, oh, my mother used to work at this house. The excuse that she gave for why she's so knowledgeable about things is like, yeah, my mother was a housekeeper, and the people that she worked for were so generous, and they would allow me to have the same lessons the children had and everything. So she gave this impression that her mother was still alive, but then now it's obvious that her mother isn't alive. So she's kind of been caught in a lie. And anywho, so then eventually, like, he just gives her an ultimatum. Like, listen, this is it. You're going to go back to London and find a position in Lady Bridgerton's household, or I will report you to the magistrate for theft. And the consequences of her being accused of theft would be, at that time, hanging, or possibly being shipped to Australia. And then if, like, he requests for a pardon for her, the condition would be that she would be released to his custody. And if she's released to his custody, back at square one, being his mistress, which is something she doesn't want. So she's just like, listen, I hate you. You're making me hate you right now. So it's just left her with no option but then to agree to work at his mother's house, which means he'll be seeing her and which means he'll be seeing her, yes, and she'll be seeing him as well. But then it's something that is going to torture her for a long time. So she agrees to leave for London, and even and she's just like, we have to leave now. I'd like to leave right away and I'll wait for you in the library. So how this whole thing unfolded of them leaving my cottage wasn't simply like them having one kiss and then him having a conversation with Mrs. Crabtree, like just a one-on-one, and then where she's like talks him out of pursuing Sophie because of the power dynamic that they have, where she has no choice but to oblige to everything he says. And then him like kind of taking the gentlemanly stance of like breaking things off, cooling things off, and walking away from that situation and actually going back to London. That's not how it went down in the book. And this here marks the end of what was in the book versus what was in the show for episode 3, which is the field next to the other road. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will catch you on the next one.